The roast came out of the oven at 5:30 and went onto the carving board, and the oven was still hot and the pan stayed in. What was in the pan was the point. The dark, sticky, concentrated fond on the bottom of the roasting pan, the rendered fat, the caramelized meat juices, the browned onion that had been sitting in the drippings for 3 hours, was the foundation of the dinner's most important component. Not the roast, the gravy. The roast was the occasion. That doesn't change. The gravy was the thing the family was actually there for. You could tell because everyone asked for more gravy and nobody asked for more roast. Scratch gravy needs 3 things: drippings from whatever you cooked, a roux or thickener, and the willingness to stand at the stove and stir. That last element went away. Not the drippings, not the flour, the standing, the stirring. A packet of Heinz gravy mix cost 15 cents in 1968 and produced a standard, adequate, repeatably brown result in under 5 minutes without drippings, without a roux, and without anyone standing at the stove. The packet did not replace the grandmother's gravy. The packet replaced the grandmother's time, and the grandmother's time was more valuable than the packet's convenience could compensate for, and the gravy it produced was what that transaction cost. These are the 15 gravy dinners every grandmother made that no one cooks now. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Number 15. Pot roast with pan gravy. The foundational dinner. Pot roast was not one dish. It was a system. A chuck roast, the shoulder cut, the tough, well-marbled, collagen-rich piece that becomes tender and deeply flavorful after several hours of low, wet heat. Seared in a cast-iron Dutch oven in hot fat until dark and caramelized on all sides, then surrounded with onion, carrot, celery, and potatoes, covered with beef stock or water, sealed and cooked at 325 degrees for 3 to 4 hours. A chuck roast cost 49 cents a pound in 1962. What came out of the Dutch oven at the end of those 3 hours was not just meat and vegetables. It was a liquid, dark, rich, savory, deeply concentrated, carrying the flavor of the seared beef and the browned vegetables and the hours of low heat that had collapsed the collagen in the meat and dissolved it into the braising liquid. To make the gravy, pour the braising liquid into a saucepan, skim the fat, whisk in a flour roux or cornstarch slurry, simmer until thickened. The result was a dark, glossy, rich gravy that tasted of that afternoon's chuck roast and nothing else. Not generic brown gravy. One is available in a packet. The other is available in the dripping pan of a chuck roast that has been in the oven for 3 hours and in no other way. Number 14. Country fried steak with cream gravy. The Southern technique. Country fried steak was not steak. It was round steak. The lean, tough hindquarter cut, pounded thin with a meat mallet to break down the muscle fibers, dredged twice in seasoned flour, fried in a cast-iron skillet in hot lard until the breading was deep golden and crisp on both sides, then removed from the pan. A pound of round steak cost 55 cents in 1960. What remained in the skillet after the steak came out became the foundation of the cream gravy, the hot drippings, flour stirred over medium heat until the roux turned from pale to golden, whole milk added in a slow stream, stirring until the mixture thickened into a white cream gravy seasoned with salt and considerable black pepper. The cream gravy pooled between the potato mound and the steak and soaked into the breading at the edges and served as the reason the dish existed. The steak served as the delivery vehicle. The cream gravy constituted the dinner. A generation of Southern grandmothers knew this. The cast-iron skillet and the pounded round steak needed an hour of active work. The result needed a family, and the family needed to be the kind that gathered at 6 for a plate with cream gravy. All 3 of those things have become harder to arrange than they once were. Number 13. Pork chops with milk gravy, the farmhouse version. The pork chop with milk gravy served as the farm kitchen's version of the country fried steak principle applied to pork. Season the chops with salt and black pepper, dredge in flour, brown in lard or bacon, drippings in a cast-iron skillet over high heat until the surface was dark and caramelized. Remove from the pan and make the milk gravy from the drippings before adding the chops back to finish cooking covered in the gravy. A pound of center-cut pork chops cost 59 cents in 1963. The milk gravy, fat and flour in the same pan, cooked to a slightly golden roux, Then whole milk added in stages, stirred vigorously, reduced over medium heat until thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The chops returned to the gravy for the last 15 minutes, absorbing the warm, savory, slightly sweet milk gravy and finishing tender rather than dry. The milk gravy had a flavor that cream gravy and brown gravy do not share. Slightly sweet from the milk, slightly rich from the pork fat, slightly savory from the browned flour, with the particular flavor of the pork drippings running through it. The milk gravy tasted of the pork it was made from. This is the thing that a packet cannot produce. A packet produces a gravy that tastes of the packet. That is the entirety of the difference. Number 12. Hamburger steak with brown onion gravy. The weeknight dish. Hamburger steak was ground beef. Approximately 6 ounces, formed into an oval patty thicker than a hamburger but thinner than a meatball, seasoned with salt and black pepper. Cooked in a skillet in a small amount of fat until browned on both sides and cooked through, then removed from the pan while the onion gravy was made. Ground beef cost 39 cents a pound in 1960. The brown onion gravy, sliced onions cooked in the remaining fat until dark golden and sweet, flour stirred in and cooked briefly, then beef stock added to deglaze the pan, scraping up the browned bits, simmered until thick and dark and savory. The hamburger steak returned to the gravy to finish for 5 minutes, absorbing the onion and beef flavor. The hamburger steak with brown onion gravy constituted the weeknight version of the pot roast in compressed time, 30 minutes on the stove instead of 3 hours in the oven. It was on every grandmother's Tuesday rotation from 1945 through 1975. It has no equivalent in the modern weeknight dinner rotation. The modern weeknight dinner rotates through things that do not need deglazing, things that do not produce a hot pan with browned bits at the bottom, because there was no browning, because there was no pan, because there was no fond. There was no fond. Number 11. Smothered chicken. The slow gravy. Smothered chicken was not chicken in a gravy. It was chicken cooked in the gravy, a distinction that changes the result entirely. Chicken pieces seasoned and dredged in flour, browned in hot fat in a heavy Dutch oven, the gravy made in the same pot, the chicken covered and simmered inside it for 45 minutes to an hour. A whole cut-up fryer cost 35 cents a pound in 1960. The chicken that emerges is soft, tender, the meat falling from the bone, and the gravy has absorbed the chicken's flavor throughout the cook time. The gravy tastes of the chicken that has been simmering inside it, and the chicken tastes of the gravy that has been surrounding it. The smothered chicken was a dish that needed no division between the protein and its sauce because they had been producing each other simultaneously for the past hour. Served over white rice, which absorbed the remaining gravy. Every grandmother who made this knew the correct lid position, slightly ajar, to allow some steam to escape and the gravy to thicken. That knowledge transfers by watching. It does not transfer well by reading. The drippings pan after the roast, the skillet after the chops, the Dutch oven after the chicken. All of these were, in the grandmother's kitchen, data. Information about what was available, what could be made, what was already halfway done. The fond on the bottom of the pan was not the remnant of the cooking. It was the beginning of the next step. The grandmother thought, "What am I making?" The answer was always gravy. The gravy packet removed the question by removing the scenario. No pan with fond, no drippings, no flour toasted in fat. Warm water, the same gravy on the pot roast and the same gravy on the pork chops. Generic. Consistent. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have more of this list. Number 10. Baked. Chicken with giblet gravy. The Sunday centerpiece. The baked chicken on Sunday was not a roasted chicken. It was a chicken baked in a covered roasting pan with aromatics, producing a chicken that was falling tender rather than crisp-skinned, which was the correct texture for a chicken that was going to be served with a thick giblet gravy poured over every piece. A roasting chicken cost 35 cents a pound in 1963. The giblet gravy began the morning. The giblets simmered in water with aromatics for an hour until the gizzard was tender. The liquid strained and the chopped giblet meat returned to the stock. The chicken's drippings went into the giblet stock at carving time. The combined liquid thickened with a flour roux into a dark, rich, fragrant gravy studded with small pieces of giblet meat. The combination of browned chicken drippings and long-simmered giblet stock produced a layered, savory, slightly gamey depth that was the signature of Sunday baked chicken in that household. Some households were giblet households, some were not. The ones that were had a Sunday gravy that the ones that weren't never experienced. Nobody makes it on a regular weeknight, and the knowledge of how to make it is leaving the household along with the generation that knew what the giblets were for. Number 9. Braised short ribs with dark brown gravy. The cold weather dinner. Beef short ribs braised for 3 to 4 hours in a covered Dutch oven with aromatics, wine or beef stock, until the meat slipped from the bone with a gentle push of the fork. Beef short ribs cost 35 cents a pound in 1963. The braising liquid at the end of 3 hours was not a braising liquid anymore. It was a rich, dark, deeply savory, slightly gelatinous sauce that the dissolved collagen from the ribs had thickened over the course of the cook, producing a glossy, unctuous gravy that required only straining and seasoning before serving. Dark, rich, slightly sweet from the onions and carrots that had cooked in it for 3 hours, with the deep beefy flavor that only the short rib's fat and connective tissue can produce. Poured over the meat. Spooned over the mashed potatoes. Used to soak the bread that appeared at the end of the meal to address the remaining gravy in the bowl. The bread at the end of the gravy dinner was not a concession. It was always the plan. That dark gravy cannot be replicated in under 3 hours. Nobody makes it on a regular weeknight, and the knowledge is leaving the household along with the generation that knew what the giblets were for. The patience needed is the ingredient that has left the kitchen. Number 8. Salisbury steak and mushroom gravy. The upgraded hamburger steak. The Salisbury steak elevated the hamburger steak. Ground beef mixed with onion, Worcestershire sauce, dry mustard, breadcrumbs, and egg, formed into an oval patty, browned in a skillet, and finished in a mushroom onion brown gravy that was thicker and more complex than the simple onion gravy of the hamburger steak. Ground beef cost 39 cents a pound in 1963. The mushroom gravy. Sliced mushrooms and onions sautéed in butter in the same skillet that browned the patties, developing a rich, dark, savory fond from the mushroom moisture and the onion sugars, then flour added and toasted, then beef stock added, then reduced until thick and glossy. The flavor of correctly made Salisbury steak gravy is the specific flavor of browned ground beef and sautéed mushroom and onion reduced together in a pan. A dark, savory, slightly earthy, slightly sweet combination that is one of the most satisfying flavor combinations in the post-war American kitchen. It is also the flavor that the frozen TV dinner version approximates, imperfectly. The frozen approximation is not the dish. The dish is the browned mushroom gravy from the skillet. That difference is not recoverable by purchasing the frozen version. Number 7. Chicken and gravy over mashed potatoes. The pure delivery mechanism. Chicken and gravy over mashed potatoes stood as the gravy dinner in its most direct form. The gravy was not a sauce for the protein, it served as the purpose of the meal, and the chicken and the mashed potatoes existed to provide a vehicle for delivering the maximum possible quantity of gravy to the person at the table. A whole fryer cost 35 cents a pound in 1958. The chicken was poached or baked. The cooking method mattered less than for other dishes because the chicken was not the point, and the pan drippings or poaching liquid became the base for a thick, savory chicken gravy. The gravy thickened into a rich golden brown sauce. The mashed potatoes formed a mound on the plate with a well at the top, and the warm, fragrant golden brown chicken gravy was poured over everything. The mashed potato well was not decorative. It was functional infrastructure designed to hold a maximum volume of gravy. Every grandmother in the household knew the capacity of that well. They had been filling it for 20 years. Number 6. Smothered pork chops in cream gravy, the Southern Sunday version. Smothered pork chops were the pork chop elevated from the farmhouse milk gravy dinner into something that needed an afternoon and produced a result that the farmhouse version did not achieve. A pound of pork chops cost 59 cents in 1965. The preparation. Thick bone-in pork chops, seasoned and dredged in flour, browned hard in cast iron until deeply caramelized on both sides, then removed while the smothering gravy was made in the same pan. Onions cooked in the pork fat until soft and golden, flour stirred in, chicken stock added to produce a thick, savory, slightly sweet onion gravy. The pork chops returned to the gravy, covered and cooked at low heat for 45 minutes. The cream gravy that poured over the finished chops was darker and richer than the farmhouse version, carrying 45 minutes of pork flavor, with the onions dissolved into the sauce and the collagen from the slow-cooked pork thickening it naturally. served over white rice. The smothered pork chop needed the afternoon and the patience and the cast iron skillet. That knowledge lives in a generation and is not being adequately transferred to the next. Number 5. Turkey with giblet gravy, the December craft. The turkey giblet gravy was made once a year in November or December, and the grandmother who made it well was the person who received the most direct praise at the Thanksgiving or Christmas table, not for the turkey, but for the gravy. A turkey cost 45 cents a pound in 1965. The giblet gravy. The giblets simmered in water with aromatics since morning, producing a dark, fragrant, slightly gamey stock. The turkey roasting all day. At carving time, the turkey drippings combined with the giblet stock, a roux made in the roasting pan from the browned bits and flour, the combined liquid whisked smooth and simmered until thick and glossy and dark, the chopped giblet meat added. The finished turkey giblet gravy was the most complex, most layered, most complex gravy in the grandmother's repertoire. Fragrant, dark, slightly rich, carrying the accumulated flavor of an entire day of turkey roasting and a morning of giblet simmering. It existed once a year. When the grandmother stopped making it, it stopped existing. No commercial product replicates it. The packet produces a brown liquid. The giblet gravy produced an afternoon in December that no packet can approximate. Number 4. Liver and onions in brown onion gravy, the disappearing dinner. Liver and onions was already discussed in this channel's earlier video on home dinners, but the version with brown onion gravy is a different meal from the dry-fried version, and different enough to deserve its own entry on this list. The gravy version. Beef liver sliced thin and seasoned, dredged in flour, browned quickly in hot butter or lard, 1 to 2 minutes per side, still slightly pink at the center, removed from the pan, and the onion gravy made from the pan drippings. Beef liver cost 29 cents a pound in 1958. The onion gravy, sliced onions cooked in the remaining fat until soft and golden, almost jammy and sweet from the caramelization, flour added and toasted, beef stock stirred in until thick and dark and savory, the liver returned to the gravy for the final 2 minutes. The liver and onion gravy, the slight bitterness of the liver, the sweetness of the caramelized onion, the deep savory brown of the gravy, all present and none dominating. The liver had to be slightly pink. A liver cooked gray in brown gravy is not this dish. It is a different, worse thing. The grandmother who made it correctly knew the difference by color and by timing. Number 3. Beef tips in brown gravy over egg noodles, the Thursday dinner. Beef tips in brown gravy used sirloin tip or stew beef, cut into 2-inch pieces, browned in batches in hot fat until deeply caramelized on each cut surface, then braised in beef stock with onion and mushrooms for an hour until the beef was tender and the braising liquid had reduced into a thick, dark, rich brown gravy. Sirloin tips cost 65 cents a pound in 1965. Served over wide, flat, slightly chewy egg noodles, the beef tips and their glossy gravy poured over the top and pooling between the noodles. The egg noodles served as the ideal substrate for a thick brown gravy, wide enough to hold the gravy without it running off, porous enough to absorb some of it at the surface, firm enough to not dissolve, dense enough to provide resistance against the fork. The beef tips in brown gravy were better on the second day, when the braised beef had rested in the gravy overnight and the flavors had integrated further. The grandmother who made this on Thursday had planned it on Wednesday. The second day planning, the overnight refrigerator rest, the reheating at lunch or dinner the following day, is a form of cooking organization that the modern meal kit and delivery era does not replicate. You cannot have the second day gravy without the first day. That is not available for delivery. That is not available for purchase. Number 2. Meatloaf smothered in brown gravy, the overlooked version. Meatloaf appears on this channel's earlier lists with a ketchup glaze, which is the version most people remember. The version nobody talks about is the meatloaf finished in brown gravy. The meatloaf baked to completion, sliced, and served with a dark pan-dripping brown gravy rather than the sweet ketchup crust. Ground beef cost 39 cents a pound in 1963. The brown meatloaf gravy, the pan drippings from the meatloaf baki, rendered fat and meat juices that had pooled in the pan during the hour and a half in the oven, combined with beef stock thickened with flour, seasoned with Worcestershire and black pepper, simmered until glossy and dark. The meatloaf sliced and laid flat on the plate, the brown gravy poured over the slices and pooling against the mashed potatoes, dark and warm and savory. The meatloaf in brown gravy was better the next day because the cold meatloaf slice absorbed the reheated gravy differently than it absorbed fresh gravy. The second-day meatloaf sandwich with brown gravy was a particular pleasure that needed having made the meatloaf in brown gravy the first day. That is not available for purchase. That is a product of having been there. Number 1. The dripping pan. What the gravy actually was. Every gravy on this list started in the same place. The hot pan after the protein came out. The fond on the bottom. Dark, sticky, concentrated, carrying the Maillard reaction of the browned meat and the animal fat that had rendered out during the cooking. The fat pooled to one side. The flour went in. The roux darkened over 30 seconds of stirring. The liquid went in against the hot roux and the steam rose and the whisk moved and the gravy thickened. A roast and its pan drippings produced approximately 0.115 worth of gravy ingredients in 1962. The packet of Heinz or French's gravy mix cost 15 cents in 1968 and produced approximately the same quantity in 3 minutes without a pan, without drippings, without a roux. The packet was cheaper, faster, and more consistent. The packet also removed the most important element of the grandmother's gravy, the connection between the gravy and the dinner it was made from. The grandmother's pot roast gravy tasted of the pot roast. The grandmother's short rib gravy tasted of 3 hours of braising and the dissolved collagen. Each gravy was unique to its meal. Each gravy existed once and was finished. The packet's gravy tasted of the packet every time, regardless of what it was poured over. What was lost when the dripping pan was set aside was not just a technique. It was the relationship between the cooking and the sauce. The grandmother's gravy told you what she had been doing all afternoon. The packet told you nothing. Drop in the comments which gravy dinner you most remember from your grandmother's table, because the main thing was always in the pan after the dinner came out. The main thing was what she did with what was left.